Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sirius Report. My name is Ken Shorgen. I'm here with London Paul. And Paul, by God, is it possible that we may actually have a ceasefire in West Asia between Hezbollah, Hamas, Beirut, Lebanon, and Israel? Who knows? But we're going to find out and see what our thoughts on that. Paul, I want to thank you as always for being a part of this discussion. And what's your take on this sudden, out of the blue acceptance of a ceasefire?
Well, firstly, thanks for joining us ever, Ken. It's great we get together. I think it's interesting because we've had so many false dawns. How many times have we heard statement that there's going to be a ceasefire reached, and then it's happened with Hamas, it's happened with Hezbollah, and nothing comes to fruition. And obviously, it's a bit of a strange one because it's kind of an agreement that ultimately relates to Israel and Hezbollah, but the agreement is actually between Israel and the Lebanese government. And the argument is essentially it's a return to how the world was prior to October the 7th, 2023, when, of course, Hamas invaded Israel. Now, there's a number of statements and points, and we'll go through them because obviously it's important. There's some context in a broad sense what this agreement's about. And effectively it says, Hezbollah and all other armed groups in Lebanon will not carry out any offensive actions against Israel. Israel will not carry out any offensive action against targets inside Lebanon, including on the ground, in the air, and at sea, because as we know, Israel's been heavily bombing targets with totally unopposed because, of course, the Lebanese and Hezbollah don't have any air defenses to stop them doing so. And then there's a statement that said Israel and Lebanon recognize the importance of UN Security Council 1701. Now, that's relevant because that basically came out that was supposed to be the solution to the end of the 2006 Lebanon Israeli war, in which Israel, of course, lost the war, even though no one likes to admit that was the case. And that was talking about a total cessation of hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah, the withdrawal of Hezbollah and other forces from the Lebanon south of the Litani River, and basically the disarmament of Hezbollah and other groups, and the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Lebanon. And this was really obviously, done certain Lebanese military south of the Litani River. That is about 20 miles north of the border between Israel and Lebanon. And that obviously Lebanon would then be fully in control of this region, and also to deal with the capture of Israeli soldiers at that point in time. So both countries reserve the right to self-defense. This is really trying to effectively marginalize Hezbollah and say, well, only Lebanese forces are allowed in this region. But the point about UN Security Council Resolution 1701 is it was all fine, but no one took any notice of it. Very quickly, Hezbollah was back where it was, and Israel, not all the time, but was continued bombing the country and doing whatever he wanted to, and no one took any notice of it. I mean, so the idea you're going to monitor and control the supply and production of weapons, is going to be under the supervision of Lebanon. Well, fine, but Hezbollah doesn't get its weapons from this, so it's kind of a bit of an irrelevance. And all facilities that Hezbollah were using to manufacture weapons will be dismantled. Well, good luck trying to find them, because you won't. And dismantling military infrastructure of Hezbollah, and obviously, there has to be some way of monitoring and enforcing these commitments again. When has that ever happened? And also, Lebanon will deploy its own military and security forces along the actual border between Israel and Lebanon. and that Israel's going to withdraw all its forces in a period of 60 days. And the US is going to promote indirect negotiations between the two to recognize a land border. I'm not exactly sure what there is to recognize because there's an official border between the two countries. So is there something more to this than meets the eye? Well, let's wait and see. The Lebanese army, the problem is, doesn't have the resources, the money, the manpower, the equipment to fulfill any of these obligations. There was exactly the same as what happened in 2006. Of course, there's a lot of completely erroneous understanding of the situation in the West because they think Hezbollah's weakened. And, somehow Lebanon's now this time going to re-establish control over southern Lebanon. And of course, then there's this old thorny problem that if Hezbollah or anyone breaks the deal and poses a threat to Israel, then Israel can have the right to self-defense. Well, what does that mean? I mean, if Israel doesn't like something, they could just say, well, we were threatened, and then it's, we're off to the proverbial races again, for want of a better word. Now, interestingly, the US did come out and say, well, the deal needs to uphold Lebanon's sovereignty, and the demand for Israel to strike with impunity is not part of the ceasefire agreement because Lebanon said there's no way it's happening. And the question is that going to carry any water? Because, with all due respect, Israel is very fond of breaking UN Security Council resolutions or ignoring them. I'm not saying they will, but if they don't like something, then the problem is we could just be back to square one. So it all sounds fine in principle. And if we avoid the problems of 2006, it's entirely feasible it could work. But there's a number of puzzling questions, which we'll come to in a minute, Ken, because I want to get your feelings on this, and then we'll discuss some of the reasoning behind this, what might really be going on. And so I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, obviously the focus of the ceasefire is in regards to what's going on with Israel, Hezbollah, and Lebanon. I'm more interested in the long run what's going to take place in Gaza and Palestine. Primarily being is what, many in the West, because there wasn't any real conflict, there was the occasional skirmish, but Israel was slowly just moving in. Settlers were occupying Palestinian land, and it was sort of encroaching bit by bit by bit, drop, or I should say drip, drip, drip into that, and then eventually things, led to a head. So rather than, what's going on with Lebanon, because Israel has gotten themselves, and I kind of thought this is what would end up happening if they went on the offensive, is they got too stretched out dealing with Hezbollah, dealing with Hamas, dealing with going after Iran a little bit, now going after Lebanon. They're a small country and they just don't have the capabilities to have conflicts on multiple fronts. So it's not surprising that after they feel they've made a statement, I don't think they've even come close to getting their objectives, but making a serious statement that they can have something say, hey, you know what, we protected Israel, we stuck it to Hezbollah, we stuck it to Hamas. Whether that was the is going to be the end result, as you mentioned, Hezbollah is not going to go away. The question is what they're going to evolve into. But in regards to Palestine, unfortunately, at least from the rhetoric coming from the U.S. and the incoming Trump administration, um, I foresee this being a very dire time to the Palestinians and their land. And if that happens, then the ceasefire is really going to be temporary. In the long run, it may be a year, maybe a couple years, but it's going to give time for more coalitions. And we're talking probably sovereign coalitions versus militant fighter groups to then decide what's going to happen to the Palestinian question.
Yeah, it's a very multifaceted problem or issue, because the first question is, and this there's different schools of thought on this, but we've heard that Hezbollah is agreeing to this. I mean, that's probably as much, well, it won't matter because in a couple of months we'll just go back to the old status quo. But the bottom line is we said this from day one, Israel could never win a ground war in southern Lebanon and defeat Hezbollah. The way the organization is structured, it's not a coherent unit. It's in lots of little groups who work independently. So, you can't they thought, oh, well, we'll kill Nasrallah and that changes everything. It changes nothing. And the organization carries on. And, it's like guerrilla warfare. And they've had, destroyed dozens of Israeli tanks and killed a number of Israeli soldiers in the process. And really, this is a way for the Israelis to walk away from a problem they can't resolve. Because there was an attempt a while ago, and certainly the US was part of this, where there was an idea, well, maybe we could have some sort of change of government in Lebanon, which then would help us remove Hezbollah. Well, there seems to be a compromise where we're not removing the government and we'll sit there and pretend Hezbollah no longer exists. But they couldn't defeat Hezbollah, Israel. So this is a way of saying, well, we've got a get out clause. We can make all noises that we achieved our objectives. And look, Hezbollah's been neutered as an institution, as an organization. So that's why we've agreed to this ceasefire. And, in a few months, sadly, people have forgotten what happened because they'll have moved on to something else and it won't matter. So I think that's one consideration. Now, just to add to this, and this starts to make things seem even more interesting, is the Hamas has come out and said, and this was a statement in the French media, where a spokesperson was stated that Hamas is ready to agree to a ceasefire in Gaza following the declaration of this truce between Israel and Lebanon. They said, and we want a serious agreement on swapping prisoners. They claim the declaration of truce in Lebanon is a victory and a success for us, our forces and Hezbollah. So they'll spin it as a victory as well. But again, you can't defeat Hamas. You can kill as many members of Hamas as you want, and for every one you kill, 10 appear. So they can't win that war either. So it's very telling, and we have to take this with a bit of a dose of salt and not assume it's factually going to play out this way. But if we work on the premise that there is substance to this, and in fact, there is going to be an agreement and it will stay in place between the Israelis and the Lebanon, and obviously that includes Hezbollah. But if that were true, and suddenly there is an agreement between Hamas and Israel, and that were true, and suddenly all these wars stop, then there has to be, the question is why? There must be a reason for it. And I would suggest, and I'm not saying this is factually true, but I think a lot of what's going on might revolve around Iran. And here's why. Because Iran said last time when there was the idea that originally Iran was going to respond to Israel, they made the statement they were responding because the West had done nothing to stop the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah and between Israel and Hamas. And that was one of the conditions they apparently agreed with the Americans. Look, we will go easy. We don't want a massive escalation as long as you fulfill your side of the bargain. Well, that clearly failed. And that's why we subsequently then had the fact that Iran took their time after, obviously, the provocations to do with Nasrallah and Haniyeh of Hamas. And they obviously exposed the very soft underbelly of the Iron Dome. And there was no invincibility of the Israeli military. They could clearly strike with hypersonic missiles anywhere they liked, when they liked, and they were able to map the weaknesses of the Iron Dome in the process. And of course, Israel responded, and it was a very muted affair. They didn't cause any damage, any destruction, because, of course, as we said, and no one agreed with us, and it turned out the Iranians admitted they had Russian S-400s and they shot all the missiles out the sky. Now, there's been a lot of mutterings in recent times from the Iranians and the Iranian media to say, well, we might actually consider more retaliatory action at a time and date of our choice. And I think the United States and the West panicked and has gone, well, hang on a minute. Remember last time what they did, if they really go full throttle, they could cause massive devastation to Israel. And it'd be far worse for Israel for that to happen than if we actually agree to what Israel has suggested, Iran suggested, and say, we'll end these wars and end the conflict, and everyone can de-escalate and go home. So it's possible that the United States is behind these moves to end the war between Israel and Hezbollah and Israel and Hamas. Now, we're presenting a supposition here because this could all end in tears tomorrow or next week. But if this does hold, I would suspect it's because Iran said you either do this or we're going to go for Israel in a major way. And the US has gone, well, we can't do anything about it. So the only way you can do it is to enforce this ceasefire and make it look like everyone's won and everyone can say, it was a success in the end and Netanyahu can come out of this looking like he has won when he hasn't. And of course, the argument is no one's won. It's been a horrendous war with terrible devastation for the people in Gaza, the Palestinians, but also by extension. Of course, there's a lot of civilians who've been killed in Lebanon because of all the aerial attacks that the Israelis have conducted there. So I think it's a possibility that that's precisely what's going on. And it makes sense based on previous discussions when the Iranians were very explicit and said, well, the reason we've responded the way they are is because promises made by the United States have not come to fruition. Well, if those promises have now come and they now are coming to fruition, then we could be at a major turning point where in a month or two, it's like the war is over. And look, because it happened in 2006 with Hezbollah, there's a history for it. What the long-term ramifications for the West Bank and Gaza is an entirely different question. But if there's a way to end the war and it's successful, then everyone should be extremely happy about this because this cannot go on, given all the suffering that people are, whether particularly the Palestinians and obviously the Lebanese, but for that matter, there are Israeli people suffering as well. War has casualties on every side, and it has to end. And if someone's brokered a deal, and it could be the Chinese might be involved in some capacity as well, then more power to their elbow.
Yeah, especially, there was a story that came out just a couple of days ago. In Israel itself, 10,000 buildings have been destroyed. The people have been protesting in the streets. And there is, of course, hanging over the Netanyahu's head is the indictments from the ICC. So there's a lot of things in here, and it's looking at obviously the ceasefire is something in the very short term that people are desperate for. Hopefully it stands. However, unless the Palestinian question gets once and for all taken care of, because if you think about it, if you look at the map, Palestine is inside, the borders. The whole region is geographically on the map skewed, very bad. They need to decide, especially now that most of Palestine is absolutely razed to the ground. You've got the potential to do what you had in 79, I think it was 79, between Egypt and Israel, Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat, a finally coming together and doing some type of accord that is binding and lasting. I mean, you really haven't had anything going on between Egypt and Israel since that agreement was signed. So something needs to be done. And honestly, because if you look at the history of how Israel came to be, it was sort of a seizing of it following the attack on the King David Hotel, and then the UN afterwards made the agreement of giving Israel the land. Well, things weren't really settled. It was just like, okay, we're going to recognize borders where they're at. In the meantime, a few conflicts over the course of 67, 72, etc., changed those borders a little bit with occupied territories, but now is a potential, a really good one for the members of the Arab League, the United States, China, Israel, of course, bringing in to really set some things. There might be the potential that, okay, fine, Israel, your border is going to be here. You're going to get Jerusalem. Uh, you're going to give up maybe the Golan Heights. Syria gets that back. Set this up, make an accord that will eliminate the need for a PLO, a Hamas, a Hezbollah to try to, support, do their things to support the Palestinian reorganization. And then, of course, you have the Arab League come in, China come in, rebuild, and create some type of settlement and stability in that region where Israel really has no leg to stand on. They got a few things that they want, they got their assured protection, and the Palestinians then can start looking at a future where they can start, building and moving forward. I honestly think that this is just a Versailles Treaty type thing. It's a ceasefire, an armistice for 20 years until the next blow up takes place, unless they really address the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And it might not be 20 years, it could be 20 weeks or 20 days. This is so, yeah, you are at a watershed moment. I know it's desperately complicated. We're not going to discuss this today because it's far too long. And we're trying to keep these segments short on what we're doing. But there has to be a way of just stopping the wars. And then there needs to be some serious discussion about what needs to happen. And it can't be swept under the carpet anymore. And, at the end of the day, there's going to have to be compromises on all sides. And that's just an impossible discussion to have because it's highly emotive for different people for different reasons. But there's no more excuses. It has to happen. And that's the end of it.
Absolutely. Anyway, in the long run, you know what? This is a good thing. I should say in the short run, it's a good thing. In the long run, hopefully, better heads and political heads are looking for the future rather than just a continuation of status quo. Paul, as always, thank you for your great insight into this discussion.
Yeah, and likewise.
And to everybody here at the Sirius Report community, thank you for all of your support. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment, send this out to anybody you think could be important. And until the next time we get together, have a great day.